War doesn't start with explosions. It starts with silence. The silent shift in a nation's breath. The uneasy tension that creeps in before anyone admits it's already too late. In 1939, Europe felt that silence, but no one felt it more sharply than a young Polish soldier named Marek Kowalski, a man who had never fired a weapon in anger, never imagined himself a hero, and never expected history to drag him into its jaws. Yet when the German army crossed the border, history didn't ask for his permission. It simply took him. Marek lived in a small town near Łódź, surrounded by fields that once felt endless. On September 1st, those same fields shook under the weight of tanks. The sky roared with Stuka dive bombers. The air tasted like metal, dust, and panic. Civilians scattered. Horses bucked. Soldiers shouted orders no one could hear. Marek grabbed his rifle, hands trembling, heart punching his ribs like a trapped animal, and joined the retreating line of Polish troops. He wasn't thinking about honor. He wasn't thinking about patriotism. He was thinking about survival. Anyone who claims otherwise has never seen tanks coming straight at them. Within days, Poland collapsed into chaos. Units split apart. Maps became useless. Radios were silent. Every night, Marek fell asleep with his boots on, because waking up alive already felt like a miracle. But on the 10th day of retreat, something snapped inside him. He saw a family hiding behind a destroyed barn, parents shielding their children from aircraft above, and he realized something cruel. No matter how far he ran, the war would follow. Running only guaranteed one thing: someone else would die in his place. That night, he made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He stopped running. On the 11th day, he joined a group of resistance fighters forming in the forests outside Warsaw. They weren't soldiers. They were farmers, teachers, mechanics, and former students. People with no formal training, but enough rage and courage to weaponize fear itself. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and in every measurable way destined to lose. But they had something the enemy didn't: desperation. Marek learned sabotage, how to wire a bomb with shaking fingers, how to move silently through trees, how to blend into crowds, how to bury the dead quickly, and how to disappear before reinforcements arrived. Every mission hardened him, but it never made anything easier. Killing didn't become normal. It just became necessary. By 1941, the stakes rose even higher. Germany launched Operation Barbarossa and swallowed the East. Poland became a battleground under an iron boot. Entire villages vanished overnight. And in that violent fog, Marek's unit received a message that felt like suicide disguised as strategy: destroy a railway line used to transport German armor to the Eastern Front. The track ran near a heavily fortified station. Guard towers, patrols, dogs, floodlights. It was madness. But refusing wasn't an option, not when every train that passed meant thousands more deaths somewhere else. The plan was simple in theory, brutal in execution. 2 teams, one to create a diversion at the station, the other, Marek's, to plant explosives under the tracks 500 meters away. They would strike at night. Timing was everything. They had exactly 7 minutes between patrol cycles. 7 minutes to change the course of a war they didn't even know they were part of. On the night of the mission, rain hammered the forest like machine gun fire. Mud sucked at their boots. The wind carried the dogs' barks long before the guards came into view. Marek wiped water from his eyes, steadied his breath, and crawled beneath the rails with explosives strapped to his chest. Above him, the steel tracks vibrated faintly. A train was coming soon, too soon. Then the diversion exploded. A tower went up in flames, lighting the sky like a sunrise built from gunpowder. Alarms howled. Guards shouted. Bullets cracked through the night. Merrick's hands slipped on the wet metal, but he locked the charge in place. His partner, Stefan, counted down the seconds under his breath. They had to move, now. They sprinted into the woods as the tracks erupted behind them. The explosion ripped the air apart. Metal shrieked. Ground shook. The German supply line, at least for a moment, was broken. But victory always comes with a cost. Stefan never made it to the trees. A bullet caught him from behind. Merrick dragged him as far as he could, but the blood poured too fast. Stefan died whispering the name of his daughter. And Merrick, kneeling over the body of a friend he had sworn to protect, understood the darkest truth of war. Even when you win, you lose something. Months passed. Missions blurred. Merrick became a ghost, a man whose name lived only in coded messages and brief reports. He learned to stop asking why. He learned to accept that the world had become a place where mercy was punished and hesitation killed faster than bullets. And yet, through all the horror, he held on to a thin thread of belief that one day the world would remember what they sacrificed. In 1943, that belief was tested harder than ever. Word spread of atrocities so severe that even the most hardened fighters felt sick. Entire Jewish communities were being erased, ghettos destroyed, people deported to places whispered about but never understood. Human beings reduced to numbers, and numbers reduced to ashes. When the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising broke out, Merrick's resistance cell received a desperate call for aid. They knew they couldn't save the ghetto. They knew the outcome was written before the first shot was fired. But they also knew something else. Dying on your feet is better than living on your knees. They smuggled weapons through sewers, fought alongside men and women who had nothing left to lose, and watched buildings collapse with people still inside. The bravery inside the ghetto wasn't normal bravery. It was something deeper. People who had been starved, beaten, hunted, stood against tanks with homemade grenades. They fought because existence itself was resistance. Merrick carried a young boy from a burning building during the uprising. The child's face was blackened with soot, eyes wide with terror and defiance. When Merrick asked where his parents were, the boy shook his head. Gone. No tears. Just emptiness. That moment carved a scar on Merrick's soul deeper than any wound. And even years later, that face would haunt his dreams. By late 1944, the resistance prepared for their most desperate gamble, the Warsaw Uprising. A full-scale revolt to liberate the capital and force the world to notice Poland again. It was bold, heroic, and brutally doomed. On the first day, Merrick's unit captured several German outposts. Streets erupted with hope. Flags rose from windows. Civilians cheered fighters as if deliverance had finally arrived. For a brief moment, it felt like Poland might breathe again. But the tide turned fast. Germany threw everything at the city: artillery, bombers, armored divisions. The Soviets, positioned across the river, watched but did nothing. Hope became a luxury no one could afford. The resistance ran out of food, ammunition, medicine. Buildings collapsed one by one. Merrick survived on crumbs, adrenaline, and sheer stubbornness. He fought through factories, alleyways, sewers, choked with bodies. For every meter gained, 10 were lost. Every fighter killed was replaced by someone younger, hungrier, or more desperate. On the 50th day, Merrick's group held a single ruined building against overwhelming force. Smoke made the world look like dusk, even at noon. Bullets punched through the walls like invisible fists. When the order to retreat came, there was nowhere left to retreat to. During the final evacuation through the sewers, Merrick volunteered to stay behind with a small cover team. Their job was simple: delay the Germans long enough for others to escape. Simple always means deadly. They held until dawn. By then, ammunition was gone. 2 fighters were dead, a third bleeding out. Merrick used his last grenade to block a stairwell and then pulled the wounded man over his shoulder, dragging him through rubble while gunfire tore the building apart behind him. He reached the sewer entrance seconds before it collapsed. Crawling through that darkness, shoulder deep in water, half blind from smoke, lungs burning, he wasn't thinking about glory. He wasn't thinking about victory. He was thinking about the faces of people he couldn't save, people who had become shadows in his memory, each one heavy enough to break him. When the uprising finally fell, Merrick was captured. Exhausted, starving, barely conscious, he spent the rest of the war in a POW camp, where survival depended on luck as much as willpower. Disease consumed men faster than bullets. Food was a rumor. Hope was a joke. Yet Merrick lived, not because he was stronger, not because he was smarter, but because survival is often just stubbornness disguised as fate. When the war ended in 1945, he walked out of the camp weighing half of what he once was. His hair was gray at the temples. His hands shook even in silence. He returned to his hometown, only to find it unrecognizable. Streets empty, houses destroyed, people gone. War doesn't end when guns go quiet. It lingers in the ruins and in the survivors. Merrick never called himself a hero. He never boasted, never romanticized anything. When asked why he kept fighting, he always said the same thing: because someone had to. He lived out the rest of his life quietly, working the same fields he once ran through as a terrified young soldier. He married, had children, and rarely spoke about the things he saw. Not because he forgot, but because remembering hurt more than silence. But one thing stayed with him until the end: a folded piece of paper he kept in a tin box under his bed. Inside was a drawing, a small child's sketch of a man carrying him through flames. The boy from the ghetto who Merrick had saved and never saw again. Merrick kept it as proof that even in the darkest hell, a single act of courage could ripple through time. War created monsters, heroes, victims, and survivors. Merrick never chose which one he became. He just chose not to give up. And sometimes, that's the only choice that matters.